Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dark Scroll. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to unravel with us the darkest secrets and the most unsettling horror stories that reality itself dares to hide. For those already part of our community, I'm glad to have you back, brave souls enough to stare into the abyss. Today, we will plunge into an account that haunts me more than any other I've ever heard or lived. An experience that completely redefined my understanding of what truly lurks in the wildest, most forgotten, and at times forbidden places in our world. It's not just a story of survival. It's a story about what can follow you, what can cling to your shadow, even after you think you've escaped to safety. Viewer discretion is highly advised, for some truths are better left undisturbed. My name is Alex. Before all this, I was just someone who had lost myself amidst the incessant noise of the city, the relentless demands of modern life, and more recently, a personal void that seemed to have drained all the color from my world. A series of events, small and cumulative. The loss of a loved one, professional burnout, the feeling that my life was disintegrating into 1,000 pieces, led me to a breaking point. I wasn't a professional adventurer, nor an experienced soldier, just someone who, out of pure desperation and an almost primal need for escape, found refuge in the deafening silence of nature. A quietude I naively believed only the remote, untouched trails of a place like Blackwood National Forest, nestled in the heart of the shadowy mountains, could offer. I had camped in various places before, knew the forest signs, knew how to respect it, and how to move through it discreetly. And above all, I loved the solitude that solo trekking provided. It was the only time my mind truly quieted down. Or so I thought, before the silence became another form of noise. My journey began like many others. My backpack on my back, heavy but familiar. The worn map in my hand, showing contours and streams. But not what truly lay hidden, and the silent promise of 3 days of digital detox, inner peace. A reconnection with something more primal and pure. Blackwood Forest was, and still is, famous for its primordial beauty. Ancient trees, some so old, they seem to have witnessed the very formation of the mountains, formed green cathedrals, blocking the sun with an almost impenetrable canopy that transformed day into eternal twilight. Crystal clear streams snaked through mossy beds, and the air, laden with the unmistakable scent of pine, damp earth, and something older, promised renewal for my weary soul. But behind this idyllic beauty, legends lurk. Ancient tales whispered around campfires about something different inhabiting those depths. Whispers of figures that moved like shadows. Stories I had always considered folklore for impressionable tourists, or exaggerations from isolated locals, whose minds solitude had perhaps twisted. I was about to discover how terribly wrong I was to underestimate the power of those stories, and how profoundly the forest's solitude could be corrupted. The first day on the trail was exactly what I expected. The path was well marked initially, an invitation into the forest's interior, like a green corridor. The pure air was a blessing, filling my lungs with a forgotten vitality, washing away the city's dust. The sounds of nature were soft, a distant hum of insects, the rustle of dry leaves under my feet with each measured step, the occasional melodious birdsong that seemed almost a secret tune. Exclusive to that place, I saw no living soul, just the usual wildlife. Deer timidly grazing in clearings, squirrels hopping and chattering among the high branches. Everything seemed in perfect and undisturbed harmony. I set up my camp near a serene stream, a perfect spot, isolated and shaded, but promising the privacy I longed for. I ate my dehydrated meal under the first stars that barely managed to penetrate the dense tree canopy, and retired early, eager for the deep, restorative sleep that only hiking exhaustion and cool mountain air could bring. But something was subtly wrong. The only anomaly, which I would only recognize in retrospect, was the silence. A silence that was unnatural for such a vibrant forest, so full of wildlife that I knew existed there. There was no usual hum of nocturnal insects, nor the distant croaking of frogs from the stream running a few feet away, nor the melancholic call of owls I expected to hear. Just an oppressive sonic vacuum that seemed to swallow every sound, a total absence that, at the time, I attributed to the sudden cold snap of the night, or perhaps the unusual altitude. I was tired, and the mind in such extreme conditions tends to fill the void with convenient rationalizations, desperately seeking normalcy. I closed my eyes, hoping for peace, but a prick of something undefined, a slight and persistent unease, nestled deep in my mind, like an insect under the skin. It was on the morning of the second day that things began to deviate drastically from what I considered normal, from what my vast experience in nature had taught me to expect. I packed up camp and resumed the trail, now a narrower, less trodden path, still immersed in my self-imposed bubble of solitude. About an hour into the hike, the path became more demanding, wilder, and it was there that I noticed something unusual. These weren't animal tracks, nor the unfortunate and predictable litter of other campers, which, though irritating, would be understandable. They were small piles of stones, or cairns, arranged irregularly, but with an undeniable intentionality, off the main trail, in places that made no sense for signal. I knew cairns used to mark trails in difficult terrain, but these were different. They seemed ancient, almost organic, as if they had sprouted from the earth, or been placed there a very, very long time ago, forgotten by all but something. There was one at the base of a centuries-old oak, with twisted branches like fingers, another in the middle of a small cluster of thorny bushes. My map, detailed as it was, indicated nothing there. Still, I ignored them. After all, human curiosity is strange, and nature lovers sometimes leave peculiar marks, however eccentric they may be. But the feeling of being watched began to intensify, growing from a subtle shiver to a constant pressure on the back of my neck. It wasn't a casual observation like that of a curious animal. It was persistent, almost palpable, like a weight on my shoulder. Every time I stopped to drink water or consult the map, I felt that chill, as if an invisible yet icy pair of eyes was fixed on me. I turned quickly, and nothing, just the dense, endless green tapestry of the forest stretching out, full of shadows and silence. I attributed this to the isolation, to my own mind playing tricks on me, to reading too many horror stories before the trip. But the feeling did not subside, and, to be honest, it began to root itself deeply within me, corroding my peace like a slow acid. Near noon, I stopped for lunch in a small, sunny clearing, the only one I found in miles of uninterrupted forest. As I ate a sandwich, I noticed something unusual a few feet away, near a fallen log covered in moss. It wasn't a cairn nor a pile of garbage. It was a personal object, a small hair clip, old, faded by time and weather, but perfectly folded on a vibrant, green, mossy leaf. It was such a small detail, so out of place in such a wild and untouched spot, that it deeply unsettled me. Who would fold a hair clip like? Why leave it there in the middle of nowhere? And how in hell did it get there? So isolated, with no other signs of human presence. I put it in my backpack, without knowing why. A prick of apprehension mixing with my supposed calm. The forest suddenly no longer seemed so peaceful. It seemed aware. The afternoon dragged on, and anxiety grew like a high tide. Night fell early in that deep valley, the sun rapidly plunging behind the peaks in a spectacle of shadow. I found a new spot to camp, less ideal than the first, squeezed between rock formations, but more hidden, which by then was my priority. I hastily set up my tent, lit a small but noisy campfire, and tried to relax, forcing myself to believe that everything was fine, that it was just my imagination. The silence, which had once comforted me and brought me peace, now pressed down on me, almost suffocating me with its terrifying intensity. Not discernible words, not a human language, but a soft, rhythmic, low sound, a kind of tuneless chant, as if the wind was singing in a language I almost understood, coming from the tree line, about 20 yards from my tent. I turned on my headlamp, sweeping the darkness in quick arcs, my nerves on edge. The sound stopped abruptly the moment the light hit it. I turned off the light, and it resumed subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if it were testing me, provoking. I was becoming paranoid, I told myself repeatedly. Extreme exhaustion, overwhelming loneliness. My mind was playing grotesque tricks on me, but I couldn't convince myself. Around 3 a.m., I was abruptly woken by a sound that made me jump. Not the ethereal whisper, but a distinct dry twig snap, followed by footsteps. Clear footsteps, human. Heavy, but with an abnormally slow, deliberate cadence, almost like a predator circling its prey. They were near my tent. My heart, which had been merely uneasy before, now pounded at a frantic, painful rhythm, hammering against my ribs like a war drum. I was armed, but my fingers trembled uncontrollably as I reached for the gun I kept under my sleeping bag, the cold metal a small comfort against my feverish skin. I slipped out of the tent as silently as possible, every movement seeming amplified in the deadly stillness of the forest. The flashlight off, the gun raised, muscles tense, ready to fight for my life. My eyes strained to adjust to the absolute darkness, but the forest was an impenetrable mass of shadows, where every bush seemed to hide something. I froze. I listened. And then the sound stopped. Silence. A silence that was even more terrifying than the footsteps. The air around me was freezing cold, the temperature dropping drastically despite the mild night, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. My own breathing was the only thing I could hear, loud, irregular, and desperate. I was not alone, and what was out there was watching me. I waited for almost an hour, armed and motionless, my mind racing in circles of panic and rationalization, each second an eternity of terror, before retreating to the fragile and illusory safety of the tent. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every rustle of a leaf, every tiny creak of a branch was amplified by my exhausted mind, transforming into an imminent threat. At dawn, with the first gray streaks of light filtering through the dense tree canopy, I packed up camp in record time, my hands trembling uncontrollably, leaving behind any semblance of hope for peace. My goal was no longer peace, but escape. I needed to get out of there now. I headed for the trail, now with an anxiety growing like a poisonous vine inside me, suffocating logic. About a mile from my previous campsite, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. Footprints. Clearly human, heavy boots, but with a pattern that defied logic and my understanding of human gait. They didn't follow the main trail. They zigged and zagged, circled around trees in strange spirals, turned back on themselves, as if whoever made them was playing or searching for something. Or, the most terrifying thought of all, leading me down a path that wasn't mine, a carefully orchestrated trap. Further on, the terror deepened. I found another marker, more disturbing than the hair clip or the cairns. It was a small, grotesquely twisted doll, made of dry branches, moss, and what looked like dark plant fibers with strands of human hair tangled in its limb. It was impaled on a low branch, pointing directly to the trail I was following, like a macabre arrow. This wasn't just any folklore doll. It was a message, deliberate, sinister, and personal. They were marking me. They were hunting me. They were hunting, and they wanted me to know it. That same afternoon, near dusk, as I tried to quicken my pace, pushing my physical and mental limits, my legs burning, I heard the footsteps again. Not just one. Several. Coming from the dense forest to my left, following me closely. They stopped when I stopped. They sped up when I sped up. It was a macabre dance. I turned sharply, my voice hoarse with fear, and screamed, "Who's there? What do you want?" No answer. Just the silence filling the void of my screams. A silence that seemed to mock my fragility, my insignificance. I ran. I ran like I had never run before in my life, my lungs burning as if on fire, my heart pounding a desperate march against my ribs, my mind in a state of primal panic. My muscles screamed for rest. My throat was raw. But the image of those insane footprints and the grotesque doll propelled me forward, through the growing darkness and absolute terror. That night I found a natural shelter, a small ravine with a rocky overhang, cramped but hidden from the main trail, a fissure in the earth. I was exhausted, my muscles burning with agonizing pain, my throat dry from screaming and running. But adrenaline kept me from resting. I was being hunted. Not by wild animals, by something human, but not entirely human. Those footprints, the markers, the way the sound stopped the moment I reacted. There was a cold, calculating intelligence behind it. An ancient malice that seemed centuries old. I began to think about the local tales of the whispering folk, figures who camouflage themselves in the forest, watch travelers and lure them or drive them into the depths of the darkness. I thought it was just folklore, campfire stories. Now I felt the cold breath of the legend on my neck, and the fear that legends could be more real than I had ever conceived. I tried to doze off, but an exceptionally loud and prolonged rustling of leaves, coming from near the tent, abruptly woke me. This time, it wasn't a distant or ambiguous sound. It was breathing, heavy, irregular, like a hoarse gasp coming from outside my tent, mere inches from the thin canvas. I grabbed my pistol. I slipped out of the tent slowly, gun raised, flashlight off, my eyes desperately trying to pierce the dense darkness. I could feel the presence. The air around me was freezing cold, the temperature dropping drastically despite the mild night, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. And then I saw them. Not one, but several. Slender, tall silhouettes, almost merged with the night's density, dark as the shadows that enveloped them, standing at the tree line, a few feet away. I couldn't see their faces. Their features were absorbed by the canopy's darkness. But I felt the gaze, a cold, empty, hungry, intense. Their movements were strange, almost as if they were lurking in the wind, swaying slowly, like trees in a gentle breeze. And then, one of them, with a slow, unnatural movement of a long, thin arm, raised its hand, pointing directly at me. There were no words, no verbal threats, only that oppressive quietude and the undeniable sensation that I was the prey, surrounded and cornered. My heart pounded like an uncontrolled drum. I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. My hands were clammy with cold sweat, despite the sweat running down my face. My survival instinct took over. I screamed, a hoarse, desperate sound that echoed in the night's solitude, and fired a warning shot into the air, the gun's blast tearing through the silence in a violent, resounding way. They didn't flinch. They didn't run. They showed no reaction of fear or surprise. They simply spread out, moving with a ghostly, silent speed through the trees, disappearing into the darkness like smoke, or perhaps dissolving into it. I ran, disoriented, tripping over unseen roots and rocks, my arms instinctively rising to protect my face from whipping branches, without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, only away from. My lungs burned as if on fire. My muscles screamed for rest. My legs failed under the extreme exertion. My throat was raw. But the image of those faceless, empty-eyed silhouettes propelled me forward, through the growing darkness and absolute terror. I ran until exhaustion consumed me, until I collapsed into a heap of raw nerves and aching muscles. It took me almost 24 continuous hours to get out of the fog. My arms and legs were scratched by branches, bleeding from superficial cuts, my clothes torn and soiled with dirt and sap. I was utterly exhausted, to the point of almost passing out, my mind clouded by sleep, deprivation, and incessant panic, but alive. When I finally spotted the main road, a pale line on the horizon of civilization, my pickup truck seemed like a sanctuary, a beacon of salvation. I drove aimlessly for hours, panic hammering in my chest like a tribal drum, until I reached a small park ranger station at the edge of civilization, an outpost of order amidst the wild chaos. I reported everything: the strange footprints, the unsettling markers, the inexplicable sounds, the silent silhouettes, and the relentless pursuit. They listened to me with a distant politeness, with that air of someone who has heard many stories from frightened, exhausted guests from the forest's interior. They said it was likely I had encountered a group of bush hikers or transients who lived more reclusively, perhaps local eccentricities or pranks. They promised to investigate, of course. I knew they wouldn't find anything. They never do, because what's out there leaves no traces for those who don't want to see. The memory of that hike haunts me like a ghost, a constant presence in my life. I never went back to Blackwood Forest. That silence in the forest, which once brought me peace and refuge, now screams louder than any sound, filled with the whispers I swear I still hear on windy nights, in moments of quietude. That feeling of being watched never left me, not even in the safety of my home. Today, years later, I still feel eyes on me, especially when night falls and shadows deepen indoors. It's as if something followed me, something that clung to my soul in that forest, something that doesn't forget and won't let me forget. I decided, in an act of desperation and search for some validation for my experience, to share my story on online forums for trails and unexplained mysteries. What I found there chilled me more than anything in the forest. It wasn't an isolated experience. Messages from others from all over the country with hauntingly similar accounts. People who found strange markers in other remote forests. Twig dolls, bizarrely stacked stones, personal items left as offering. Who felt they were being pursued by figures that moved like shadows, who had their belongings investigated. Some even mentioned whispers that infiltrated their thoughts, or empty-eyed figures watching from the dense darkness. The stories differed in details, but the essence was the same. It seemed that the Whispering Folk was not just a localized legend of the shadowy mountain. It was a reality that lurked in various wild and forgotten corners of our world. A truth that revealed itself only to those who dared to go too deep. I realized that Blackwood Forest is not just a place. It's a living entity with its own archaic rules and its own defenders. And the Whispering Folk are its sentinels, its claws that reach out to those who venture too deep into its secrets, those who don't understand that the forest's silence is sometimes a warning, a border. They don't seek to physically kill. They seek something more: to observe, to mark, to instill fear, to remember. And the terror they instill is their way of asserting themselves, of protecting their domains, of making it clear that you don't belong there. I'm living proof that the world is far vaster and more terrifying than we imagine. And some forests, those that truly guard the deepest and most unspeakable secrets, do not want to be explored. They want you to know that you are being watched, that you are not alone, and that you never will be again. Fear is a mark, and they mark you forever. If you have a story that haunts you, that science cannot explain, or that made you question reality itself, share it with us on the Dark Scroll. Perhaps together we can shed some light on the shadows that pursue us. But no, by delving into these narratives, you too might become a part of them. And remember, in the depths of the unknown, on the silent trails where the forest never sleeps, the greatest terror is not what you see. It is what sees you. It is what has marked you. And it waits. Subscribe for more hidden truths, if you dare. If you truly dare.